So next up, I'd like to introduce Associate Dean Kim Foreman, who's going to introduce our panelists tonight.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. It is my honor to introduce our panelists this evening. So I'll start with Dr. Karen Ford. She recently retired after 24 years at James Madison University. She taught in the social work department, policy, social welfare history, research, and a course in culture and race. Karen played a large part in the development of the School of Strategic Leadership Studies at JMU, as well as teaching in and directing the school. Before JMU, Karen has worked as an inner city middle school teacher, Girl Scout camp director, wilderness educator, administrator for juvenile corrections, and city youth services director, ending up amazingly, her words, as a college professor and administrator. She holds a BA in history and political science from Emory and Henry College, and a Master of Social Work in Social Policy Practice and Administration from Virginia Commonwealth University. Years later, she landed in Washington, D.C., earning a doctorate in social work and social policy from Howard University. Dr. Ford's research and consulting work has focused on highlighting women of color in leadership roles and helping folks move toward opening up their nonprofit organizations to move diverse leadership and board forward. Dr. Ford believes that there are many paths toward a less racist society. She looks forward to discussing practices that have the ability to move individuals toward anti-racist thinking and behaviors. Dr. Calvin Lawrence graduated from JMU in 1983 with a bachelor's degree in physical education. Later, he moved to Texas and earned a master's in physical education from TCU and a doctorate of education in educational administration from Baylor University. Dr. Lawrence continued his career as a secondary school principal and then moved on to higher ed as a program director at Tarleton State University and then as the Dean of Development Studies at Ranger College in Texas. Currently, Dr. Lawrence works as an independent consultant and a public speaker specializing in leadership and diversity. Dr. Lawrence says that he believes in relationships. He firmly believes that before you can educate anyone, as long as they believe, you can care about them. Mr. Sal Romero Jr. is also a graduate of JMU. He migrated with his family to the United States from Mexico at the age of 13 as a non-English speaker, undocumented immigrant. He is starting his 5th year as the Director of Equity and Community Engagement for the Harrisonburg City Public School System. He joined Harrisonburg City Public Schools in 2006 and since has served as homeschool liaison, English as second language teacher, and vice principal. Prior to coming to HCPS, Sal was an athletic trainer at Buffalo Gap High School and served as the Director of Second Home, a before and after school program. Mr. Romero is very active in the community as a member of the Welcoming Harrisonburg Council, Shenandoah Valley Premier Soccer League Board, and COSPU, COSPU. He is a graduate of the Blue Ridge Community College, James Madison University, and Shenandoah University. Sal was appointed to the Virginia State Board of Education in 2014 by Governor Terry McAuliffe. In 2018, Sal was elected as the first Latino to Harrisonburg City Council and is currently serving as vice mayor. Stefan Peierls is also an alum. He graduated from JMU in 2013 after having had the privilege to facilitate a JMU Teach course he created called Diverse Unity. Having designed the course and its assessment, he became increasingly interested in how he could apply this perspective to volunteerism with other students. In the winter of 2014, he co-founded Passion Impact, and over the past 7 years, he has supported both high school and college students in the Portland, Oregon area pursuing their passions through volunteerism. Over the past 2 years specifically, he has been part of a pivotal shift at Passion Impact as they move more intentionally understand students' needs and how the organization is showing up to support those needs. As of 2020, PI is now engaging youth in fostering self-awareness, interpersonal understanding, and social justice through civic leadership, and is guided by their DEI values, vision, and statements. Stefan has and will continue to be working on himself as a white, cisgendered male to understand how he shows up to support youth, families, and communities of color with specific regard to those in Passion Impact programs. Welcome you all.
Thank you so much, Kim, for those introductions. It's wonderful to hear about all of you and all of your amazing attributes and successes. And just thank you for being here to our panelists. Thank you for your time, for your experiences, and for your voices that you're going to share this evening. We had a meeting earlier this week with the five of us, as well as some of the other fellow planners, and it was a really fantastic conversation. So I know we're in for a treat this evening. You know, that being said, though, the fight against racism and identifying our work in that fight is not always an easy topic to broach. It can get uncomfortable. JMU is a PWI, a primarily white institution. So I don't need to look through our Zoom screens here to guess that the majority of us here on this call are white. But just by being here, we are making the statement that we are ready to toss off our white comfort. We are ready to engage in difficult conversations and make necessary change. We are open to examining our own privilege that we have simply by the color of our skin. Tonight is time to lean into any discomfort you feel around this subject.
You're muted, Katie.
You guys, I was on a roll with my talk. It was going so well. Was I muted the whole time? When did I start becoming muted? I don't know how I became muted.
About 20 seconds ago or 10 seconds ago. So just that last little bit.
Did you hear that JMU is a PWI? Did you hear that part?
Mm-hmm.
That we need to check our privilege?
I got that.
Okay. How about lean into our discomfort?
Start there.
Start there. Okay. It was not my cat's fault. It was, I don't know whose fault that was. Anyway, but tonight it is time to lean into those discomforts to see how our actions and words and our efforts can not only have genuine intent, but lasting impact. So it is a safe space here tonight, as you can tell by my beautiful blushing and my amazing, somehow miraculous muting. This work of allyship that we are here to discuss tonight. It's never done. We are all in the process of growing and of learning. So please utilize that chat that I mentioned before, and just utilize that to learn how that you can become a more impactful ally. Okay, so with all that in mind, hopefully I'll stay unmuted the rest of the time. And if the panelists, you guys can go ahead and unmute too, that would be great. Because I'd like to pose our first question. So racism is a term that makes people feel very uncomfortable sometimes. And so I'd just love to start the evening off by asking how you define racism, how you would define that term. And I think we're going to start with Dr. Ford for that one.
Yeah. And people can call me Karen tonight. Since I'm retired, you know, that was always easy, but you know, now I'm definitely statusless from that. Anyway, race is weird, and it's a social construct. We finally come to realize that. And it's socially arbitrary. It has changed over time, and it's cyclical in how we pay attention to it. And, you know I'm an overeducated older white woman, and I've known that for quite a while. And that, that realization is important to be able to sort of place yourself in the conversation. And, you know, the whole concept of race started, and race was thought of as kinship. So if I was a candlestick maker, my kin group, my race would be other candlestick makers. And I'm not going too far into the lecture, but you know, the Age of Enlightenment, when we got around to classifying everything like plants and animals and flora and fauna, people decided to classify people by the way they looked. And then it was used to exclude people. And then we talked religion on it that made it okay to do things to people that weren't like us. And we still live with all that jumbled up history about race today. It is used to bring people in and to push people out. And we, you know, struggle with it. And it makes people in dominant culture sometimes uncomfortable. And really, one of the things I've learned is that's okay. We have to learn to grapple with the issue and what it means to us. So I look forward to a good dialogue this evening amongst the panelists and you all out there in Zoom land.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Karen. Calvin, did you want to go next?
Katie, I will. I'm not as eloquent as Karen, and we're on first name basis tonight. So it's Calvin as well with Karen. But I would say this, my dealings with racism really in the definition, because I really wanted to make sure I had my own definition and gave that tonight, is really a pigmentation issue. It's really the color of your skin versus the other folks who may be around you. So that racism is a visual thing. It's something that happens because somebody looks different, because they are, Karen alluded to some of the facts that I may still go over, but it happens because you see somebody and they look different, or they come from a different background, but they look different. The look is critical. And I'll give you a story. So if racism to me is, if you're walking into a store, if I'm walking into a store, and if Karen walks into a store, it may be the cashier doesn't give Karen a bit of mine, but she watches me pretty closely. And she doesn't know my background. She doesn't know that maybe we're educated at the same level. We both have a JMU tie. She doesn't know any of that. But what she does know is what she sees. And what she sees is this. And so she watches me because maybe a stereotype says that somebody who looks like me is more likely to put something in their pocket and walk out of the store. And she watches me. I could give you some other scenarios, but I won't belabor it. I know we've got some other folks on the panel, but it is that issue, and it can be that blatant. And I'm saying it's blatant, but I thought about two words. I thought about racism as being, it could be blatant and it could also be subtle. And that might be more subtle than blatant. Someone a little bit smarter than me would have to divide that diviner there. But sometimes you have that blatant racism. We've seen that with some of the cases that happened last year that really spurred the Black Lives Matter movement. And then there are these subtle deals. And maybe when I think about it, what I just explained to you guys is much more subtle. It's there, and you know it. I know it when I see it.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate that. Stefan or Sal, you want to chime in next?
Sure, I'm glad to go next. Thanks for the invite, and hopefully everybody will be able to take something away tonight. So, just to kind of expand on what has already been said, in my experience, I've experienced racism really more in a more indirect way, right? Or direct, but in a more subtle way. So the body language that you see in people when you walk into a space, right? The way that people respond to you when they hear your accent, right? The way that people sort of relate to you when they hear your name. So obviously, for me as a Latinx man, walking into a place, if I'm wearing a suit and I'm dressed out pretty well, I think that I typically get perceived differently, right? Because I think status also plays into this whole situation. And so for me, it's, if I'm on the phone, I could experience racism right away based on the way that I sound and based on the way that my name sounds as well. So, when I think about racism, I think really about the ways that oftentimes people get treated based on just from the get-go, not just based on what you look like, but also what you sound like and where you were born. And so again, for me, the body language is something that I'm always keeping an eye on. And so there's been a few times, unfortunately, in my community where I have walked into a space and I can see and I can feel, and that feel is real. I mean, nobody has to tell me what it is. I feel it, right? And so that's really my gauge for feeling racism in a personal level.
Great, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's great. Thank you. Stefan, any comments?
Yeah, thanks again for having me. And just want to make sure, can everybody hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Times my mic goes out. So we met earlier this week, and I hadn't actually written out a definition, and I've never written out a definition. And so right now I'm currently reading How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi, and something that I think I'm like very much into that. And so it's kind of shifting my mind and to focus more on like a definition. And so what I wrote down was racism is utilizing the construct of race to oppress those of a different race. To dive into that specifically about just the way that race has been constructed to make it seem as a status. And I think I like the stories that Calvin and Sal brought up. I think that those really show how that comes to fruition. And yeah, I think that's kind of the base that I'll leave it at for me.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really impressive quote, because it's talking about the, the construct of it and how it's used, immediately. And I think, and then, yeah, as you said, like it's the construct of the oppressor puts it onto the people who are other, right? It's this sense of otherness that is so, just so divisive in this area. So maybe Stefan, keeping with you with this next question, you're doing this reading, which is fantastic, but why is it so uncomfortable sometimes for white people to talk about racism? We use the terms white privilege and white fragility. So, how would you define those terms, and how does that get wrapped up in the discomfort that white people sometimes feel?
Not all white people feel it, probably, and because I don't want to speak on behalf of all white people.
Yeah.
But there's the idea that, and very much a real notion that because I am white, I have certain privileges in a system where white people have designed this system to benefit other white people. And so the issue with white privilege is the tearing down of the power of the people who have built that system. And it's the fear that if that power shifts to a different race or group of a tribe of others, that power that was once vested in you and your tribe is now at jeopardy, and you potentially have everything to lose. And that fear is that white privilege that is that balancing point. I would say white fragility is that balancing point. It's like, how much is someone willing to invest in and pushing themselves as a white person to that edge to say, I'm relinquishing the power that has been vested in me for generations in this system. And so to not get even further, because I know there's 4 or 3 other panelists that have plenty more knowledge on this, but I think for me personally, that idea around white fragility is something that as a white person, I have to lean into, and I have to understand why I'm personally scared, what experiences I've had in my life that I've very much benefited from because I'm white. To Calvin's point earlier, walking into a store, is someone going to look at me? Is someone going to walk around tailing me to see if I'm going to steal something? If I feel like I can do that anywhere, rural, urban, I'm fine. That is a huge privilege. That's a huge privilege. And so I'll leave it at that and pass it off to whoever's next.
Yeah, before I pass it on, I just want to point that out, because I think sometimes we hear the word privilege, right? And people think, oh, that means you grew up with money and you've been highly educated. That's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about what you and Calvin are talking about, right? Being able to walk into a space and not feel examined, right? So
I would say that yes, and it's very much the other part too. The system has been built to perpetuate white people in power, which also could be money and resources. And so both that and navigating a social construct as well is very much tied inexplicably together.
Yeah, great. Who wants to go next? Karen, great.
We have to be taught about white privilege, because as white people, we don't see race often. We just are. And, while race is certainly a social construct, white privilege is a Western construct that's sort of evolved in our world. And I think as a white female, I understand the concept of male privilege vis-a-vis how I've lived my life, which has given me insights into the overall concept of white privilege. And understanding privilege doesn't mean you're going to be diminished. It's not a sum zero game. It is, oh yeah, I got this because I'm white.
Mhm.
When I was in graduate school, it was amazing being around all these brilliant scholars of color and my classmates. And we go down to this jerk chicken place on Georgia Avenue. Check it out, it's the best thing ever. And I was the one that would get the look when I walked in with my friends. And it was fine because I was getting great jerk chicken, but it gave me a slight insight into what was their daily life in many instances, and that they were questioned even due to their status as the deputy director of the Maryland Red Cross and director of housing for a city. You know, and I just wanted to punch people, and they recommended I not do that. But privilege gives you a place that you don't have to think, and you don't have to think about how you're acting. And we as white people or members of dominant culture need to realize that that's what that's about on many levels.
Great, thank you for that, Karen. Sal or Calvin? Sal?
Sure, I'll just say a few things because I know we have a lot of questions, but of course I don't know why people are afraid to talk about privilege because I'm not white, so it would be hard for me to know. But I assume talking to some friends that oftentimes, who are white, obviously, oftentimes it's just that fear, right, of saying the wrong things and making things even worse, right, and being in situations that are very uncomfortable. You know, in education, I know with a lot of my colleagues, you know, as soon as you bring race to the conversation, is like nobody wants to say anything, nobody wants to talk about it. So I think that, you know, in the school system that I work at, Harrisonburg City Schools, we are really encouraging those courageous conversations because we have to have these talks, right? We have to ensure that people feel safe in order to really be able to share how they really feel. And honestly, when we talk about these things, you have to be very honest about it. And, you know, it's just when you're honest about it, you're just afraid you're going to let some people down. And it's one of those very uncomfortable things that I think as a society, we need to continue to do better in making sure that these are conversations that we're having, you know, ongoing in schools, in communities, elsewhere. So absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Calvin?
Katie, I guess I'll throw in something. This is a tough one for me, just as what Sal was saying. It's tough in a way it's not tough. And I'm going to go back to something Stefan said a little bit earlier about he was defining or having to define racism. And it's interesting, you know, how you think you know something until you're called on the carpet. We're all being called on the carpet tonight with regards to these issues. So it's kind of like, okay, now we have to think about, you know, what do I believe? Because you can read, and we've all, you know, really learned it, folks in this room, but it's now, what have you internalized? Because this is the learned man. What have you internalized, and what now is a part of your belief system? And so I'm not sure who said it, but sometimes I don't think people who are not in the majority, or who are in the majority, who in this case in the United States maybe are white, don't have to think about privilege. And for that reason alone, they don't think they're privileged. And I think Karen said it, I think she said in a way, if I can remember correctly, that they are thinking economically. And Sal has already mentioned that, you know, sometimes when we talk about race and status, sometimes they're intertwined, and some of this is complicated. That was the word I wanted to use, and just came back to me. It's really complex, and a lot of the issues that we talk about tonight are complex. But to think about I'm privileged and you're not of this upper level, higher level, whatever you want to call it, and you're not driving I hate to use a car because that will put me at a certain level, but some car that's very expensive that maybe costs 6 figures. I'm not privileged, so I don't own that, but yet I have the ability to do some things that other people cannot do. So let me go back to my storytelling again, because I guess I'm better at that than some things. So if I'm applying for a job, and I did several times as a principal, and sometimes race worked in my favor, but in a lot of cases it won't. And so what happened in some cases was I may have the same level, the same ability, the same credentials, but the other guy got chosen, or the other gal, because he looked a certain way, and because the people in that community or the people who made that decision were more comfortable with that decision. That's privilege.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think people think about it as much as maybe they should think about it, but hopefully we're to a point now, and we're addressing it tonight, and that's part of why we have that question, that they can themselves in terms of something like that happen around me or somewhere where I've seen it, and then how do I go about making a change with that?
Mm-hmm.
I guess the same thing with, and I'm not touching on white fragility as much, but I'll use another little story. A friend of mine who's a lot smarter than me again talked about this movie 42 with Jackie Robinson and some of the things, and it only covers 2 years of his life. But what happens in the movie, and we had this conversation, and he said, you know, that what they did was that was probably just enough white people to not get upset. The white fragility part of that was that there are certain issues that they could have, some slurs, there were some ugly things in there, but stayed away from some things just so that it was feasible for the general public. And I hadn't thought about it like that. And this friend of mine is from India, and he had thought about it a lot more deeply than I have ever have. And then now when I think about it, and when I look at movies that are, or shows and depictions, I'm always looking for, could they have gone a little bit further? And if, or did they stop right there because they thought that was all that the general population, the majority population could handle? That's, to me, white fragility.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's, you know, as you were telling this story, I was like, oh, they whitewashed the movie. And like, even that term, right? Like, that's privilege, because it's your look, you know, your skin tone being used in a context that's very common, right? So, you know, yeah, it's a fascinating conversation. And I think it's one of those things where people, get afraid to think about privilege, because, you know, it's not that you've not had a rough life, right? It's not that you've suffered. It's not that you've had obstacles. It's just there are certain things that are inherent, right? And I think, you know, obviously, conversations like this, we hope can help people help examine those. And Karen, you were going to say something?
Well, a quick example of white privilege is some of the language that we use without even thinking about it, like, oh, you're the black sheep of the family. Mm-hmm. And what about being the blue sheep of the family? I mean, that does not roll off our tongue. Mm-hmm. And that constant, the ability to use that also sort of reinforces the us and them sort of feeling. And
Hey, Karen, I'll throw another one in there. It may or may not fit, but how about brown nosing? My nose is already brown, so I can't brown nose any more than I'm brown. I'm as brown as I'm gonna get.
Yeah. Sal, you were going to say something there too?
Yeah, I was going to say something very brief. You know, the whole notion of the master narrative, you know, when it comes down to education and how we tell the stories of people suffering through history, but we're telling it through the eyes of a white person, right? So I think that is super problematic, because our students are definitely not getting the opportunity to hear the experiences through the life of those who were oppressed. And so I know that is something that we're working with in Harrisonburg to make sure that we correct.
That's great news. That would be, yeah. I mean, I have kids who are in the Harrisonburg public schools right now, and they talk about Martin Luther King, and I'm like, wow, that's just not even getting anywhere near, what really was going on, and things like that. So that would be amazing to have a real meaty curriculum there.
Yes, next year, by the way, next year we'll be teaching an African American studies at the high school.
Great.
Of course, by an African American teacher, right? And it'll be great, highly guaranteed.
Great, fantastic. So a concept that comes up regularly, and it's kind of actually perfect that Sal, you just mentioned this class that's going to be taught by an African American teacher. So a concept that comes up pretty regularly is this idea of emotional labor. And this is a term, I actually did some research on this prior to this evening. It was originally coined to describe the mental bookkeeping and kind of activities that oftentimes women in a relationship, in a family, will do, making sure that the laundry's clean, making sure that the schedules or the kids are at, wherever they need to be on time, doing those kind of menial tasks, or not even menial, just those kind of bookkeeping tasks that are often unpaid, right? And so in recent years, this idea of emotional labor has begun to be used in the fight against racism, with the unfair assumption that the repressed people, or the minority people, underrepresented people, should be leading the charge, right, in this fight against racism. And again, often without that compensation. So when organizers undertake initiatives to assess their culture, why is it important for white people to also take part in these conversations, instead of placing that work only on the Black, Indigenous, people of color, and their colleagues? So Sal, why don't you start with that one, since you're doing a lot of work with that right now?
Sure, man. I'll try to be as brief as I can. Yeah. So
or not.
Of course, the fact of the matter is that we're here because it was, the whole situation was created, and systemically it will continue to exist as long as we allow it to exist. And so, people who created this may not be my colleagues who are currently, living in the same era that I am, but certainly they're, like, Stefan was referring to, tribal, that has a lot to do with where we are. So they need to be part of the solution. I think that there's a very important part in the process of acceptance, right? That's really key for, I guess, in my terms, acceptance, and the fact that there's a willingness to make the work happen. We can do it together, but I think that is very common in a lot of the organizations. They tend to tap onto the people of color to get it done. Plus, like you were saying, there is no additional compensation, and people are doing it on their own time. And that is an example that I know we're trying to also correct in Harrisonburg, because we have people who have the best intentions to get it done. But again, they are being tasked with so many different things. So, it's a process of healing that I think people have to be involved with as a community. And one of the things that we're doing right now in Harrisonburg is that we're trying to make sure that through our Equity Advisory Council, that we advise the superintendent to ensure that anytime that there is work in this area, that there is compensation associated with it. So I'll just leave it at that, and let other people jump in.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Sal. Yeah. Anyone else want to jump in on this idea of why it's important for it's a group effort here and white people take charge? Yeah.
Well, I think that when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, one of the reasons we're talking about it is because of what white people set up. Mm-hmm. And they've got to be, they're part, we are a part of the problem. We have to be a part of the solution in concert and conversation with our brothers and sisters of color. I mean, we've got to come together to figure out how we're going to move forward. And to Sal's point is there's got to be, in an academic sense, release time. You get committed to death in academia. So, I mean, I don't know where you go with that.
I don't know what you're talking about, Karen. Yeah.
Well, we'll have lunch. But the bottom line is it's a both and. It's not an either or, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, wonderful.
That's good. That's good, Karen. I am going to let Stefan finish this one up, and maybe somebody may come back around, Katie, because just in case somebody needs to do like not a rebuttal, but you know what, just an add-on addition to. But here's a good place for me to put in this little piece. It's a favorite quote of mine. I'm a big quote guy. And this quote really wasn't about race, but in its essence, it's about freedom. And when we talk about racism, we're talking about freeing more freedom. And so I'm gonna use it. So justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are.
Yeah.
Who said that? Benjamin Franklin. And he said it with regards to the Revolutionary War and the fight they were fighting for freedom. Now, there's a lot of connotations to that, and it was true. They needed everyone to be outraged in order to make that thing happen. But if you think about it, when you're trying to overturn a system, and Karen alluded to it, is of oppression, you need the oppressors. The oppressors need to be, they're part of the solution. And so everyone has to be affected. Now, I'll throw this in. This is my 2 cents on the outrage at the same level. Because someone who I usually don't watch said this, and then it really got me to thinking about maybe folks who don't look like me, people who are white, Anglo-Saxon heritage folks, will never be as outraged as a person who's actually going through the problem. And I can get that, but I also know we're looking at people in this room. I think they came because they want to make a difference. I know, Stefan, anytime you think about a guy who came up with a course, the course was what? Course in Diversity Unity. And now he's got an organization that's working for it. He's committed to the cause, and he doesn't have to be. Karen went to Howard University, and everybody knows that Howard is the HBCU. She didn't have to go there. She could have gone anywhere. And so when I think about that, and then this is going to date me, Katie. So, but I don't mind doing that. So when I think about any movements, when I think about any of the civil rights movement is the one that's more close to my heart of the 60s. And when I think about the progress that was made, it wasn't made with one group. They were made with multiple groups. In fact, there were brown members, Sal, who were involved as much as African-American members and white folks who made that thing happen. Because when we, I think of another quote, when one of us is oppressed, really, if you think about it, we're all oppressed. And this thing about freedom in this country, and I really do believe it. I've got my all-American tie on here. The only reason I wore the tie tonight was because I really do love the country, and I'm hopeful that we can make the changes that we need to make. And maybe not all overnight, but we're in it. We're in it, as the kids would say, to win it. I'm in it to make this thing happen. So it's about bringing everybody together and bringing, I guess I would say, I'll throw this in and then I'll shut up. It's about getting the critical mass that we need, because we may not get 100% of a buy-in. I don't know of any place that does that, but if we get the right numbers, and it's happened over and over in history, if we get the right numbers and the right folks, and we've got to have folks from all backgrounds and all walks of life to make this thing happen, we can make successful changes, pertinent changes that are sustainable. And that's what we're looking for. It's not a one shot, one hit, one miss wonder. We're looking to make positive change that is going to be there for our posterity.
Great. Thank you, Calvin. Stefan's been taking a lot of notes, so I'm excited to what he's going to say.
I have a lot on this one, but I don't want to take up too much time.
No, do it. It's great. It's all wonderful.
So we, as Passion Impact, we started a cultural audit last October. We just finished it about a month ago. There were two parts of it. One was a demographic survey, one was an indicator assessment. Never done it before. We had 4 people, 2 people who identify as Black queer women, and then a white woman and myself. 1 paid staff, myself, and then a work study student and a volunteer. I'm on the DEI committee for Passion Impact, and I think that as the executive director, it is not only my job, but it is my responsibility to, as the person kind of vetting major decisions, to have an idea as to what we're doing overall and how we're representing and how we're not meeting the needs of our students or our communities at large. So it's number one, extremely important to do that from the top down, to set that example, to show that anybody else in an organization can be part of it and should be part of it. So we did our cultural audit, and right now we're sifting through all of this data. We have a lot of information, and we're trying just to connect some things, and we're taking our time on it. We're not rushing with this urgent, we have to get it done by this time, and then our strategic plan, and da-da-da-da-da. It's okay that it takes more time, because we know that the work that we're doing in DEI is going to be a forever thing. It's going to continue to work. We have to focus on it that way. Other things that I've done with Adriana, our high school program manager, we started talking about making DEI part of her job description. So 15% of her job is DEI. What does that mean for her? She runs the DEI committee. She helps in producing the projects and running the meetings, and then working with our work study student who works specifically with the DEI committee. A few other things that I thought about for an organization. I was sitting down with a friend of mine a little while back who is one of 4 Asian identifying males at an organization of 1,000 engineers, most of whom are white men. And they had a PowerPoint slide. The company, was all on a call like this, and there was a DEI slide, and it was a checkbox. Cool, we're doing DEI stuff, let's move on. That checkbox mentality is what is perpetuating racism. That checkbox mentality is something that if you see, you can act on, you can ask questions about. That checkbox mentality is what we are experiencing on a day-to-day basis. Get out of the checkbox mentality. Start asking questions. A few other things here, gatekeeping. As an organization, what you do is provide resources for a certain group of people. It could be products or services, it doesn't matter. You're the one holding on to those resources. How are you determining the structure of your organization to then make it easier for people who are not able to actually access those resources? And if you're a white organization, if you're the one white person organization that's starting to think, how are we representing the BIPOC community in this process, then you are the piece that's starting that movement away from the checkbox mentality. And there's a potential that emotional labor that might be put on somebody if they were in that position, that it's not required. You can take that on for that person as a white person. And so I want to just to kind of end with like the emotional labor aspect of this, that emotional labor is real. It is something that you may feel for a specific area in your life, but for something like race, this is, I'm gonna pull Kevin here, a story real quick. In Portland, we have this thing called SUN, Schools Uniting Neighborhoods. Serves schools where there's 50% or greater lower income students at the school. This one partnership that we've had in 2016, when Donald Trump got elected, instead of going about our meetings like usual, the 2 monthly meetings in a row, we took time away from those monthly meetings to just talk about our feelings, to talk about how everything was going. I was one of 2 white men in a group of 16 people, and I remember a woman, specifically a very, very passionate woman, who was talking about how she has to wear armor. She constantly has to wear armor, and she has to teach her kids to wear armor. Yeah. And she hates that she has to teach her kids how to wear armor because of their skin. And that is just the basis of that emotional labor that then perpetuates in any situation that is asked upon that person. Hey, can you do this thing? It seems like you might be the right person just
Right.
because I'm a person of color. Maybe, but maybe not. There has to be that investigation and understanding of how that person's emotions are affected by the decisions of the white organization or even an organization of color. But that specific person, their emotions need to be invested in, and maybe taking a pause on a meeting is a perfect thing to do, to let them think and to allow them that space to cope with those emotions. Okay, I'm done. That was a lot.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so much wonderful there. Karen, you were going to say?
And
Sorry.
tagging on Stefan's remarks from an organizational perspective, if an organization goes to the trouble to have a DEI committee and come up with organizational norms, the key piece is that they follow up and that they don't sweep things under the rug. If there is someone or a group or a team in the organization that goes against the norms that the group set up, there have to be consequences. Otherwise, it's nothing. It's just chatter, checking a box.
Yeah,
We've checked the box and we're not responsible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Katie, can I say one last thing too? I know we need to move on, but I'm going to say two things. One in response to Stefan, the other one in response to just the whole group. And I'll maybe do the group thing first. So I know we got all these questions and we're going to get to a point where, and I saw Mr. Walsh already sent it into the chat about going to get questions from the audience, but this is deep and this is rich, and we don't need to rush. We don't need to, you guys don't need to feel rushed, Sal. And so get into the questions, because I think the people are here to hear what we are. Really just kind of bleeds into what Stefan is talking about. We didn't come tonight to check boxes. We came to try to make a difference. And I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna pin on that point that because it's a powerful point. If you, and it's getting ahead of our plan, but I'm gonna throw it in here because I'm thinking about it and I'm getting old and I forget. So when you can hold people accountable, make them do the thing that they need to do, and hopefully you're in a place where people are more authentic. We used that word the other night when we were talking, but authenticity, you can see it. I'm gonna go back to what Sal said earlier, is that when I can see racism and I felt it, and I'm old enough to know it when I see it. I know when somebody's being authentic and when they're also just checking the boxes. And so what we've got to do is push the envelope, and I'm talking to everybody in the room. I'm talking to everybody in the room to make sure they just don't check the boxes, because it's going to be real easy for folks to do it. It's on everybody's agenda right now, but while it's on their agenda, let's hold their feet to the fire. And I think good things can happen. I'm done.
Can I riff on that?
Absolutely.
Calvin, that was fantastic. And I think something that comes to mind, if anybody ever took a class with Dr. Warner at JMU, he had this thing where it was like the 3 wise men. It was, you asked, why did you do this? Why did you do this? Why did you do this? 3 times. And then you get to the root of it. And really it's about that purpose. Like, why are we just doing, like, is it just a checkbox to say we've done it? Or are we actually doing this to make the change that Calvin was talking about? That authentic change that we really want to see. And that purpose is the division piece of it. So that's, for me, someone asked, Bardia asked about the checkbox mentality. It's about the purpose, to me at least. I mean, could be different, but really getting down to the purpose of it. Why?
Great. All right. We are short on time, but there are some questions that I really think I would love to get to if we can. So the one that I want to talk about, and we can maybe circle back to other ones, but I'd love to jump to the topic of imperfect allyship. This is something that I've certainly felt in my life. I've had that moment of hesitancy where I'm like, am I going to do something wrong? Am I going to say something that's going to offend someone in my journey to try and become better? You know, and so this imperfectness can sometimes immobilize someone who really has well-meaning intentions. So how would you address that concern where, you know, someone is worried about misstepping or coming off as something that they aren't in this journey towards allyship. Calvin, do you want to start with this one? Because I think you already kind of touched on it a little bit, but I'd love to jump more.
I'll jump right in on this one and try not to, well, I just told everybody not to worry about it, so I won't either. So imperfectness. So we've got folks out there that are, I just wrote down, I'm taking notes like Stefan, that they are stymied because they just feel like, I'm going to make a mistake. I'm going to say something that's wrong. I'm going to hurt somebody's feeling. I know we're in, I don't, you know, we may have people here on the other side of the pond or in other countries and whatnot, and I'm excited. And maybe they're dealing with the same issues. I know in this country, we have a PC culture and people just don't want to say things and they want to stay in a box and they don't want to get out of that. And so here's what I'm going to say. If you feel that you don't know, get out. And I think it was Karen, no, it was Kim who talked about my big thing is relationships. Maybe you might just need to talk to somebody and let them rest your fears. But I'm also going to throw this in with that statement, and that is, now's the time, if there ever was a time to be uncomfortable, now's the time to be uncomfortable. So we're having these uncomfortable conversations. We're having one tonight. You have to get used to being uncomfortable, because guess what? When you're uncomfortable, that's the way you grow. A story again. So if I take a new job, I'm going to be uncomfortable. I don't care what. I don't care how much knowledge I have. I have a PhD, an EDD, no matter what. I'm new and I'm uncomfortable because I'm new. In the same way, you're new, you go in, but here's the deal. If you never take that step, you never take the step. So the deal is that you have to take a step. You may falter, but I'm gonna go back to authenticity, and I'm gonna go back to if you're being authentic and real, the people who are working with you that may look like me, that may look like Sal, they're going to be okay with you making mistakes. In fact, hey, they're probably gonna go overboard in terms of trying to help you to understand. If you're really authentic and you really are trying to be transparent and you want to make a difference, there's people that are out there waiting for you to take that stand, to stand with them. This is about being an ally, right? So to be an ally, you've got to go out there and you got to be somewhat of a risk taker. But I tell you what, you'll grow, and the organization or the place where you're in, even your own personal space, you're going to grow from that. So Frederick Douglass said that if there's no struggle, there's no progress. So it's the same ideology or the same philosophy. If I'm going to get better, if I'm going to lift weights, I'm going to have to be a little uncomfortable for a while in order to get to the next. And then when I get comfortable again, it's time to kind of push the envelope a little bit more to get to become better developed.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah. No pain, no gain, right? Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's a journey.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a one and done. And regardless of whether we're talking about, in this particular instance, race, or folks who live with disabilities, or LGBTQ community, do your homework first. You don't start lifting weights without figuring out, do I need that funky belt? You know, what kind of shoes do I need? Do I need steel-toed shoes? I would need steel-toed shoes. So do a little background work. And then, as Calvin said, approach it with authenticity. It's not naive for me to say, if it's coming from the right place, people are going to engage with you. And the most important thing I think that one can do as an ally is to listen and then engage in conversation. I mean, I'm not going to swoop down and be the white savior to anything. You know, I want to be a partner, but to be a partner, I've got to know a little bit about it. I've got to be willing to make mistakes. We won't call any of my friends to find out some of the big faux pas that I've made over the years, but we're all still talking. And that's the important thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like the idea of being a perfect ally is that box checking again, right? Like if you're like, oh, I'm a perfect ally, then you're just checking a box. You're not willing to put in the work to keep growing, right? Yeah. Stefan, Sal, you want to add anything more?
Sure. Yeah, no, a lot of good things have been said. No, the way I think about it is that, you don't just start taking classes on becoming an ally and graduate and get a certificate and then you're all set, right? I think that you have to sort of prove yourself that you're an ally with every action, every step along the way. I think your actions can speak louder than your words. And so in everything that you do, you have to ensure that you are a true ally. One of the things I think about oftentimes is that, and it was already said, educate yourself, really be able to learn as much about the issues as you can and talk to real people, right? Talk to people because you will find them in your community, be able to talk with them. And then also be able to just examine your own privileges, because I think that's very important along the way. And the last thing I'll say, if you are not reflective about yourself each and every day, then there's no way for you to recognize how do you continue to become an ally along the way. So just be reflective in the decisions that you're making and how those are impacting the oppressed groups, because believe it or not, we have lots of people who consider themselves allies who oftentimes are doing more harm than good. And, I think that oftentimes people think that intent is great, but the impact is more important in that regard.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, for sure. Right. Intent or impact over intent, right? Always, always. Yeah. Stefan, did you want to add anything more?
Yeah. I want to touch real quick on Calvin. There are plenty of people out there that I've met that have been willing to help me stand up and be like, hey, dust your shoulders off. It's okay. You made a mistake. I also want to just jump back to the previous question is I recognize the emotional labor that goes into helping you move forward. And to come back to what everybody's been saying, like educate yourself very much. I like to think specifically about tonight. Dr. T reached out to me and I was like, I don't know if I'm the right person for this, but I'm going to try my hardest to do it, right? I'm going to put myself out there. I'm terrified that I'm going to say something wrong. Sal brought that up earlier. It's like saying, like the fear of saying something that like holds us back, but it's like, I got to try it because I probably will say something wrong. And that's okay because tomorrow I can wake up again and try again and try again. A few other things that stuck out. I don't call myself an ally. And the reason I say that is I aspire to be an ally. I don't want to say that I am because it's not my position to be the ally. If someone deems me an ally, fantastic. That's awesome. That's what I'm working on myself to do and to become. But I don't like to use that as like, hey, check my LinkedIn out. It says I'm an ally. I don't know. Box check there. Yeah, no certificate, right, Sal? No certificate. And then Sal got me thinking another thing that Dr. Warner said to me a long time ago. This is I'm getting into some weird stuff here, but like I was up for an impeachment. I was part of a like Phi Chi Theta business fraternity. I was changing a lot of stuff in the organization. There was really crazy things happening at the time, and I was up for an impeachment. And I emailed Dr. Warner. I was like, "This is what's happening. Like, what do I do?" And he just sends me like a one-liner. He's like, as long as your values and your beliefs and your actions are in line, then you're good. And I went to that meeting and they asked me, I remember a specific person asked me, like, do you trust us? And I said, no. And I was like, oh my God, I said, no.
Yeah.
I was honest. How can we move past this? That was kind of like my values, beliefs, and actions not lining up in a way that I thought that was like it should have. So to Sal's point, like, do that reflective work. What do you value? How do you take on those values and the beliefs that you kind of walk around with, and then how do you act on those beliefs in a way that constructs and construes that authentic version of yourself?
Yeah. And I love the idea of we can't call ourselves an ally. It has to be kind of something that is a constant process of becoming, right? Which ultimately, I think if you are doing it well, it's a goal you never achieve, right? It's always just something that you're aiming for. So this is what I would love to do if everyone's cool with this. Let's answer some questions from the chat, and then I want to come back to our final question, which is giving us some action items. Yeah, does that sound good to everybody? Not sure who's in charge of the questions this evening, but
Katie, it's me.
fantastic.
So, good evening, everybody. And just to remind folks that if you do have questions for our panel tonight, put it into our chat dialogue box, and hopefully we'll be able to pass them along to our panel. I'm going to start you out, folks, with an easy one. And the question is sorry, can there be racism within the same race? And if yes, what causes this?
That was an easy one? Okay.
Yeah.
Sal, you unmuted, so you can go first.
Sure. Yeah, no, I can definitely jump on this one. And I can tell you that growing up in Mexico, I came from a very, very, poor family, and we lived in a very small community. But oftentimes when we would go to the larger community for the market and things like that, I would oftentimes see people that were a little more privileged, and I would hear things that they would say about the indigenous people, right? Or the people that were darker skinned. And so over the years, I grew up and I began to recognize that those were very direct ways of people within the same country being racist about the people who were their neighbors. And so I can tell you that, there is a region in Mexico called Oaxaca, and I would hear people say Oaxaca, like you are, because people are indigenous people. Many indigenous people live in Oaxaca, so they would refer to people as a derogative term as Oaxaca, which really pained me over the years, because I just didn't, personally, I didn't see how they were different than anybody else. But I do think that there's a lot of racism in, in many different countries. Mine, particularly where I was born, it was very obvious and very evident the way that people were treated based on, whether they were indigenous or darker tone skin or just white, more privileged, because there is white privileged people in Mexico as well, as well as, in other countries. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyone else?
Katie, you said it. That question sounds easy, but it's a tricky question. So I'm going to answer it the best way I can. Now I know there are scholars in this room who have who've researched on that a lot better than I have. I only called names, as I know they're in here. But here's how I'm going to approach it. I know it happens, and I'm going to follow the same pattern that Sal followed. Within a race, and you've got shades and hues and colors, you've got folks who maybe feel like they're more privileged than others. Here we go with a story again. So in this story, y'all might be able to relate to, because I know Oprah Winfrey's told this story before, that she wanted to join this organization, but because of the hue of her skin, she was probably disallowed till this day. But think about it now. This is a lady who has become a billionaire, who's one of the most influential women in the world. And I think she could buy and sell that little organization. I don't know if she's called them out, but again, it happens. It does happen in terms of light skin, dark skin, you name it, why this group thinks they're a little bit better or whatever. It's kind of a weird deal, but even within a group, a certain grouping of folks, you might have this sort of what you would call a bias or prejudice. It shouldn't be that way, but it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Stefan?
Two words come to mind: intersectionality and assimilation. And the word intersectionality, rooted in racism and race, that just because you're a part of a group doesn't mean that you're not also part of another group. For example, if you are, as a white person, right? I'm white and there's somebody else who's white, but if I am a white person who is also identifying with the LGBTQ community, and this white person doesn't like this, then that's obviously a way to potentially be racist as well as prejudiced within that same construct. The idea around assimilation, and whoever wrote or put this question out there, I highly recommend, at least I'm only a few chapters in, but How to Be an Anti-Racist really dives into this. the idea around assimilating to become part of the more powerful, I guess, race of that area. There's divisiveness to instruct groups of people to be more like that powerful group, so that the people who are very much not like that then get pushed aside even more.
Mhm.
I'm not going to spoil the book. I don't want to do that, but feel free to go read that one.
Well, in terms of intersectionality, we used to see that in higher ed when, way before my time, clearly, you had to put your picture on your application. So if you didn't fit the look of the particular school, you were out of there. And there was a history professor at Howard, go Bisons, that waited till he retired to publish this work about the school where he had worked for like 46 years and how they had discriminated based on color. And you had to, back in the day, attach your picture to the application. So it was the lighter, or the lighter skinned, particularly women, got in ahead of darker skinned women, and it didn't evidently, according to his work, function as much with males. And it was like, oh, I see why he waited till he was retired to publish this, because they might have detenured him. And then he looked at other historically Black colleges and universities and found much the same thing. And then later did a corollary with elite white schools who said, if she looks like if she's from the coal fields of Kentucky, we're not letting her in or him in. So, there are multiple examples of discrimination within a race, and to Stefan's point, intersectionality of, because sometimes it gets so intertwined, you don't know if you're at the, if you're in the intersection of Carrier Drive and Main Street. Doesn't matter if an 18-wheeler is coming down the street, you're going to get flattened. It doesn't matter which part of you gets hit, so to speak. And then you get into classism within race and outside of race, and that's a whole nother ball game. But it's all related.
Yeah. Sal, were you going to say something more? I felt like no? Okay. Wonderful. Next question.
And thank you to those who've already submitted questions. The next question is, I would say, straightforward enough. What is a cultural audit?
A cultural audit, to be brief, is a look at, and what we did was we broke it out into about 5 different indicators revolving around like the human resources side, the cultural side, I'm blanking on them now. I could pull them up, but we broke down what parts of the organization there were touch points with students, parents, teachers, and other parts of our community. And we assessed whether or not we were meeting those areas based on all of those perspectives. And so we had a student focus group, we had a teacher focus group and parents, we had our board and our work study students. We brought everybody together to like really rank those and then have comments associated with each of them. We will be publishing this soon, so keep that in mind. I'm happy to get that over to anybody. But then we also took a demographic survey, very much like, what race do you identify as, gender, sexual orientation, and so on and so forth, to know whether or not we were, as a board and as staff, representing the students that we serve and support. And so it's kind of just a good starting point to understand where are we as an organization and what do our next steps have to be more in line with the need that's out there.
Great. Thank you.
Another question we have, and ties back to earlier conversation. Can you please explain the checkbox mentality?
I think we covered a little bit with like purpose and why, and then Calvin, you harped on it a bit. Do you want to jump back in on that one?
Try to find my unmute. That's another problem I have. The checkbox. So if you have an organization, let's say that they want to do a culture, we just got through talking about a cultural survey, where a cultural inventory where you look at the culture of your school. If you check it and you're just going in so that we can show that we've done that particular thing and now we move on to the next thing, and you don't use it for change, then that's the checkbox mentality. And what we're talking about, I think the whole panel would agree with this, is that we're talking about this thing it's got to be real, and it has to be authentic. And we want to hold people accountable for the changes that they say they're trying to make improvements. So if you do a study, if you do a survey, then I think Karen said this, there has to be follow-up. You've got to follow up, and then there's probably even more follow-up. What did Stefan said, that ask the question 3 times, at least 3 times, if not more. And so if the question's asked on the floor, what are we doing? And they can't answer the question, and there's probably a problem. So, and I hope that answers it just to a little degree.
Thank you, Calvin. The next question actually is a 2-part question. So part A, is a part of racism an outgrowth of tribalism? And if so, can we fight racism by defining our tribe as our species? Okay.
They stumped him. Yeah.
Who wants to take that? Karen, I think Karen wants to take that one. I may chime in after she does.
I'm not taking it alone, big guy.
I'll go with you then.
All right. So tribalism is a part of what separates us. Rory, you're asking the question. Well, the tribe of Irish were considered other for many years, both on the continent and once they came across the pond. Irish, when they came to the States, glommed together to protect themselves. They were their own tribe. Nobody wanted them, and for lack of a better statement, they didn't want anybody else. You got the ancient order of Hibernians, because the Masons wouldn't let them in. You have the Irish hospital because the Protestant hospital or the Catholic hospital wouldn't let them in. In the United States, we have a whole parallel system. Why do you think Norfolk State and Virginia State exist? Because we put them in tribes. We didn't let them come to the white schools. So it would be great to be one big tribe. Where they say the most segregated hour is Sunday. Well, it's also the high school and middle school cafeteria. It's much more integrated at the elementary school level. And Sal can probably talk more about this. I've been 1,000 years since I've been in a middle school. I did my time. So I don't really know how to fight this on a macro level. It really needs to be done people to people, on the journey of allyship, 1 step at a time, sometimes 2 steps back. Okay, somebody else save me from myself.
All right, I got you. I'm tag teaming in, Karen. So she ended with the best point of all, I think, and I'm going to just use that. And then if anybody else wants to jump in, they can. It's about the one-on-one. It's about me walking across the room and making a difference. And it's tough. Tribalism is real. We've seen some stuff that's happened in the last year that has really kind of clumped people together from all walks of life. But my deal has always been educate, talk to people, relate, and you'll see you have more in common than you have that are different, that things that are different. Because if we allow ourselves to be, we can tribalize, and we won't be the society, we won't be the country that we need to be. The goal is for us to work together so that we can rise together.
Now, there is actually an interesting follow-on question that came in independently to the question I just asked you. And here it is. How far are we from becoming the human race? Right.
Who wants that one? I don't want to do all the talking, guys. So I don't know that I can give you a measuring stick. I think that's the goal. I'll say it that way. The goal is to be the human race, because if we look at it, there really is one race, but all of these different ethnicities. So how do we become the human race? How do we work together to because I'll end with this piece, because the world is shrinking in more ways than one. Globally, we have to be, I think Mert is on this thing, and Topman would say, like, the global supply chain, if we haven't seen anything since the pandemic, we realize now how interconnected we are, and we realize that. And so how do we work together better? How do we dispel stereotypes of different groups of people? That's the goal. And I'm hoping that we're closer to it than we were 20 or 40 or how many ever years away. That's all I can say to that. I don't know how close we are, but I hope we're getting closer.
Thank you, Calvin. And just to remind folks here tonight that if you want to ask our panel a question, put the question into our chat dialogue box, and we will be delighted to hear from you. One of the questions that has come in is this: has it ever happened to you that the person you were trying to help as an ally turns out to be racist? And if so, how would you react?
Yeah, I'll take that one to start. I believe that we're all racist. I believe that we all have racist tendencies and that we can't escape it based on the systems that we've been part of. And so if you find that someone that you know that you're trying to help is racist, this is just a learning opportunity. It's a learning opportunity for both of you. It's a chance to ask questions and to listen, back to what Karen talked about earlier, and really be there to help understand their situation. I have a personal relationship with a very, very dear friend of mine who is, we're reading this book together, let's put it that way. The How to Be an Anti-Racist book. And it's a challenge because they have very different perspectives. And in working with them through this book, I'm starting to see more of why they believe the things they believe. So I would say that it's gonna happen. Just be prepared to listen, understand, and work in stride and walking together moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad, Stefan. Oh, Sal, you want to go?
That's okay. Yeah, I'll just say something here shortly.
Okay.
Obviously, I think many of us have experienced, whether it's with close friends or just people that we interact with over the last several years, that obviously, to some extent, the tendencies that we are living in this country right now have really created more people to disagree than at least in my time in this country. So I can tell you that I had several people that were very close to me who, just overnight, I would want to believe that something happened overnight where they just basically went the very complete opposite way that I was experiencing them, to the point where they were just not willing to even have a conversation, right? And a lot of what I'm speaking about is the whole immigration situation, right? Where somebody used to be a very close friend and would say, I would do anything for your family because I know that you guys are good people and I have learned to love you guys as humans, right? But all of a sudden, with all this, climate going on in the country, this person now believes that all people who come to the U.S. are illegal, that everybody who comes to the U.S. Is taking people's jobs, that everybody who comes to the U.S. from another country is a terrorist and is drug smuggler and everything else. And so that was sort of something that I have been experiencing over the last few years, where all of a sudden, people that I thought I knew and people that I believe and I still believe have a good heart have all of a sudden turned and have this new ideology that is really, really hard to understand. And it is even more hard because oftentimes, in my experience, they are not willing to have a conversation even, right? To the point where they just will shut the door to anything. And so that is the hardest thing, I believe, that oftentimes, as much as you're willing and are opened, some other people are just not ready. And so it takes both ends to have a dialogue and to understand each other. But I certainly have been fairly concerned over the last few years how more and more people that I know are sort of going in that direction. And so, it's just, again, one thing that to a previous question, I'm finding that we're finding more things that are separating us than things that are uniting us in some occasions. And that is definitely not good news. But I think that we just got to keep going at it, keep going at it. And I haven't lost faith in the people that I know are good and have a good heart. Hopefully they'll come around and we can continue our conversations and our friendships.
Thank you. Thank you. So if you guys will humor me, I would love to come to our last question that we didn't have time for, but we're going to steal from the questions. I think this has been a fabulous conversation, and I really am so appreciative of you guys and just being able to really jump into this subject. I feel like we could have another 5 conversations and still have things to discuss and to learn from each other. But what I would love to send everyone off with is what is an action item that each audience member here tonight can do this week to work on their journey of becoming, right? Of not becoming an end point, but of constantly learning. What's something that they can all do? I think Elizabeth has put some fantastic links to books, to podcasts in the chat. So please do take a look at that. But what do you guys have as a first step?
Nobody else wants to go, I'll go first. That way you can get rid of me. And by the way, this has been wonderful. I'm hoping that Katie will set something else up like this again, because we didn't get to 1/3, maybe 1/4 of what we wanted to. But so my statement to you guys, audience members, in terms of what you could do, and you can go out and do this right now, is to go out, try to find common ground with folks. Talk. Somebody said, Karen said it, listen, or Sal said it. You got to listen to people. You got to be willing to listen to at least get into the conversation. The people that I've seen that are doing the best jobs with this issue, the uncomfortable conversations, are educating themselves. And this is my thing, and this is why I'm so engaged and so motivated to try to make this thing work. I'm a hopeful guy, y'all. I want to bring hope. There's a lot of despair. There's a lot of disparity. We talked about how people are having issues, but there's hope as well. There's hope for a better tomorrow. And my goal is to bring hope. In fact, I can throw this in here right now. I got a little shirt that says hope dealer. Part of my deal this year, 2021, is to bring hope wherever I go. And if it's just a small thing, somebody said the other night, even if you can just do something that's great or nice to someone, a smile, open the door, pay for their coffee, whatever you can do, it starts people to think about, hey, this is where we should be, and this is who I should be, and maybe they can pass it forward.
Beautiful. Karen, just going around.
Okay. Well, one of the great things about James Madison University, other than that they paid me for a long time, is all of the opportunities that the university provides to take a look at other, whether it's Asian American Week, Pride Week. Avail yourselves to the many opportunities that are out there. One of the most fun things I did was go to an African drumming event, and it was mid-semester, and it helped get stuff out, but I ended up talking to a lot of really neat people that if I hadn't gone there and dragged my kids along, I wouldn't have had that opportunity. So I know things have been a little crazier with the pandemic and things that aren't happening that used to happen. There is a Center for Multicultural Student Services. Check out their events page. I mean, you're in a rarefied environment, and a lot of us who work there get to dip into that as well. So go beyond your comfort zone. Life starts at the end of your comfort zone. It's just vanilla ice cream if you don't do anything else. And see, that is an example sort of white privilege, talking about vanilla ice cream. You actually need to talk about Neapolitan that has all three, and you slice it. But go for it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Comfort zone is where the edge of your comfort zone is where life starts. I love that. All right, keeping going around the circle. Sal, you're next.
Sure. So obviously, I went to JMU. I know that back in 2004 when I was there, a lot of my friends were not from Harrisonburg, so they really did not know Harrisonburg as much as they spent time for 4 years in the community. So I would just say, get out into Harrisonburg, experience the beautiful, diverse community that we have. There's a lot of opportunities, connect with organizations, because we have a lot of organizations that are doing great work to support people who are immigrants, who are minorities, who are people of color. So if you need any recommendations, let me know. Spend time and reflect upon your own biases and how that is getting in the way of you becoming an ally over time. And really, have the courage to stand up for people when you see that they are being mistreated or being discriminated against because of the color of their skin or whatever other reason. And so find ways to serve and that, again, keep the journey going. It's been a fun afternoon talking and learning from all of you guys. But reach out to me if there's anything that I can do to help you become more immersed in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Appreciate that. All right, and Stefan?
So I'm going to take this opportunity with this platform to tell you something that you can do right now in any meeting that you're in on Zoom. And I'm going to do it specific to Harrisonburg, Virginia. Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy to making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will. Some were drawn to leave their distant homes in hope of a better life. And some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. What we now call Harrisonburg, Virginia, were the traditional lands of the Manahoac Indian tribe. Today, people from these bands have become and still remain the same tribe, the Manahoac. We pay respects to their elders past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And I also want to hold intentional space for the Black lives and Asian lives we have lost, as well as hold space for Black folks and Asian folks who are navigating a sea of emotions due to ongoing systemic anti-Blackness, anti-Asian, and racism always felt and currently coming to a head across the globe. In particular, I would like to hold space for Jacob Blake, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Tony McDade, Michael Brown, David McAtee, Sandra Bland, Trayvon Martin, and Elijah McClain. Please join me in a moment of silence.
Thank you very much for that, Stefan. That was very powerful. Very, very much appreciate that. And I think with that, Maun, what a spectacular way to end our evening together. Again, I want to thank all of our panelists so much for being here. I wish we had more time. I wish I could hear more from you guys. You're all fabulous. And thank you all for being here, and do stay, keep your eyes peeled. We have another event coming up in April, which I think is going to discuss this idea of intersectionality and in our fight of racism as well. So thank you all for being here. Appreciate you.